The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, good news from the front lines in the battle for voting rights, plus an agenda for change, why progressive Democrats will not settle for just stopping Trump, and what women running for office are doing to be part of that change. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Miles Rapoport has spent his career fighting for American democracy. He says that as we face one of the most concentrated efforts in recent history to limit the right to vote, activists are fighting back and making a difference. And we say hello to Miles Rapoport, Senior Practice Fellow in American Democracy at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation, and a member of the board of the American Prospect. Miles Rapoport, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be with you.
Nice to have you with us as well. You recently co-wrote an article with Cecily Hines in the American Prospect titled "Good News in the Voting Wars." And I guess it may surprise some of our listeners that there is any good news. But before we get to the good news in that respect, let's talk about some of the battle lines or the confrontations. You mentioned voter ID laws, for example. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Just to go back a little bit of history, the question of who is allowed to vote and how expansive and inclusive our democracy goes back to the founding of the Republic. And, we've been in a constant struggle between people who want to open up the process and let more people vote and make it more accessible to people to vote, and people, on the other hand, who want to keep it as narrow and restrictive as possible. And, that went up through the Civil Rights Movement, through the Voting Rights Act. But it's sort of taken on a new character over the last, I'd say, 10 to 15 years. People became very aware after the election of 2000 that how we run the elections and how accessible it is and how complicated it is really, really matters. And so there's been a lot of work done. And then after the Tea Party wave of 2010, it's been extraordinary how in a number of states, not all the states, and I don't want to sort of accuse all Republicans of doing this, but in a number of states, they really set out starting in the 2011 legislative sessions to restrict the ability and rights of people to vote. And one of those has certainly been voter ID. They've used a kind of a meme of the potential for voter fraud as an excuse to make it more challenging and more difficult for numbers of people to vote. And that's happened actually in 23 states, according to the Brennan Center, since the 2010 elections.
Which is amazing, too, because historically, there's no indication that there's ever been any sort of widespread voter fraud. And I wonder how they can stand up on this.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, there have been a number of studies, some really exhaustive efforts by prosecutors in different states to go after voter fraud. And, what you typically find is that there's essentially none, that there are a few people who have voted improperly. Half the time it's by accident. Half the time it's, a prank or something. But there has been absolutely no evidence of widespread voter fraud in terms of people going to polling places, impersonating other people. And that's the thing that would be cured by a voter ID law. So the argument has been debunked many, many times over, but it nevertheless it persists. But I think it's gotten more and more just purely as a political exercise, not really based on any kind of evidence.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also mention restricted access, purging, and extreme gerrymandering. What's been happening on those fronts to restrict voting?
Well, there's been a sort of a menu, I guess I would say, of different things that in one way or another make it more difficult for people to vote. Some states, have, initiated very serious purging and aggressive purging procedures, some of which violate the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, which makes it clear that you can't take people off the rolls purely just because they haven't voted. So, but in a number of states, Kansas has been sort of the epicenter under Secretary Chris Kobach of really, really trying to make the case that we have to do this very aggressive purging, and he's tried to encourage other states to do it as well. So in Ohio and in Florida, there have been and in Georgia, there have been very aggressive purging, but there's also been fight back against it.
Let's now get to some of the good news, and I'd like to go back to the beginning with voter ID laws. Where have we seen improvement there?
Yeah, there have been two things, two very strong positive trends, and I give the credit for this to organizations and individuals and litigators in the what I would call the voting rights movement or the election reform movement, who for the last, certainly since 2000, have been aggressively fighting back against these kinds of measures. So in almost every place where a voter ID law has been passed, there's been lawsuits, there have been legislative attempts to overturn it. In some states, there have been ballot initiatives. And the result has been that in a number of states, Texas, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, a number of states, where they passed significant voter ID laws, where they have been pushed back, either set aside or significantly weakened and compromised out. So that, it's still a debate over how much these voter ID laws affect it, but they're clearly designed to make it more difficult for people who don't have an ID. That tends to be poor people in communities of color, sometimes students, and to make it harder for them to vote. And there have been various estimates, but there's no question that that's the direction. But as I say, the good news is that there's been a tremendous amount of pushback against it, and a lot of those laws have been nullified.
We're speaking with Miles Rapoport, Senior Practice Fellow in American Democracy at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. He's also a member of the board of the American Prospect. Miles, we know there has been great pushback against gerrymandering. Where has that been most successful?
Well, there are a number of states where, the lawsuits in particular have been effective. Pennsylvania may be the best example, where people sued under the Pennsylvania state constitution, where the gerrymanders, people in Pennsylvania have pushed back very successfully under the Pennsylvania state constitution, where, the gerrymanders that took place starting in 2011 and 12 were nullified, and a brand new set of congressional districts have been written, which is going to make the congressional delegation in Pennsylvania much more competitive. That's also been true in Ohio, where several ballot initiatives, have pushed back to create independent redistricting commissions. In North Carolina, there's been just massive counterattacks. They finally decided to leave the districts in place for this one last election, but there's no question by 2020 it'll be vastly different. So I think Florida, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, all those states are places where there's been real pushback on gerrymandering, both in the form of cutting off gerrymanders that have been done, but also in the form of ballot initiatives that will create nonpartisan redistricting commissions to take it out of politics entirely.
And as we stay on the good news train, if you will, what about advances in voter registration?
Well, that was really the most kind of stunning discovery, I guess I would say, or revelation in the article. And that is that although, as we've been talking, the efforts to suppress the vote have gotten a tremendous amount of publicity, and there's been court battles and media coverage, a much more kind of under the radar story has been that in states all around the country, and not just blue states, there have been laws passed and procedures initiated to make it easier for people to register and to vote. So I'll give you just a few examples. In 2008, there were 2 states that offered online voter registration. And now there are 40 states where people can register online. And that makes a huge difference, especially for young people. As of this year, there are 17 states where you can register and vote on Election Day or in the early voting period. 13 states have now adopted automatic voter registration, which means that when you go to the Motor Vehicles Bureau, they automatically put you on the voter roll unless you say not to. There are 23 states where 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register and get automatically put on the rolls when they turn 18. And there have been real successes in terms of restoring the right to vote for people with felony convictions, which has been a massive abuse in our democracy, where there are 6 million people who don't have the ability to vote because of a felony conviction. There have been major advances in both registration and voting, that have had modest impact up until now, but may, for a variety of reasons, have a major impact in the turnout in the 2018 elections.
Mm-hmm. As you look around the country, how do you see these successes making an impact on Election Day, and where?
I think there are a variety of reforms that have been successful, but in, probably 30 or 40 states around the country, there are really many more opportunities for people to register and vote. And that doesn't, in and of itself, create a huge turnout. But if you couple that with a motivated electorate, which we certainly have this year, and major efforts to mobilize voters, which we have this year, I think that there's a real possibility that the combination of a motivated electorate, especially Democrats, but also in Republicans in a number of states, and major efforts for mobilization and voter registration drives, both nonpartisan and partisan, and these greater opportunities to be utilized by the people who are doing the mobilization, you may have a turnout levels that really, really go way against the grain of the assumptions that people just don't turn out in midterm elections.
Mm-hmm. There is another impediment to voting, which is the one we create ourselves when we just don't vote. We know that trust in government is at extremely low levels, and when that happens, it depresses voting. Are you concerned about that this time around, or are we going to see a change, as you sort of alluded to there?
Well, it's interesting. The grim statistics have been that the United States ranks really, really low, 28th out of 35th out of the OECD countries. And, there's been a debate whether this is because people have a hard time voting, or whether because people are just sort of apathetic or, alienated and therefore don't vote. So I've always been in the school that says, listen, let's take down the barriers that prevent people from voting, whether it's voter ID or arbitrary date cutoffs for voter registration or the felony disenfranchisement laws that we put in. Let's really open it up so that people can. And then let's see whether people really will come out and vote or not. And then the other school of thought has been, well, those procedural things don't really matter very much because it's all motivated. I think this year we may have a perfect storm in a good way. I am worried about the fact that people feel very alienated from government, and all of the, kind of things that have been happening in Washington of late build onto that. But I also think on the positive that people are really seeing that it does make a difference. That who the president is, who is in control of Congress, who is carrying out the state legislative mandates of people in the states or not, that it really matters. And so I think you're going to have a significantly larger turnout this year, even though it's certainly the case that government hasn't done a huge amount to give people a sense that it really matters for them and for their lives. But I think if there's a real change this year, and I think if there's a blue wave, then you'll see that, and if the Democrats then follow up and really deal with issues that people care about, whether it's health care or affordable college, then you're going to see people start to come back into the process more.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we don't have long to wait, and we look forward to those results. And it feels like there's a lot more energy this time around than there have been in previous midterms. So time will tell. Miles Rapoport, Senior Practice Fellow in American Democracy at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation and member of the board of the American Prospect, joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast. Miles, as always, we appreciate your time with us today and look forward to hearing back from you again soon.
All right. Thanks very much, and good luck.
You're quite welcome. Thank you. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
Social Security measure.
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Coming up next, how a grassroots movement is standing up for the future of all Americans. But first, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Once again, we enter the long season of winter darkness. And this year, we're beset by back-to-back waves of spooks. First came the little costume goblins on Halloween, seeking sweet treats from us. Cute. But then, only 6 days later, here come the real horrors of the season. Office-seeking politicians of the extreme right demanding votes on Election Day. Not cute, because they promise an agenda that's more Trumpian than Trump, ranging from harsher treatment of the poor to enthroning the rich over America's workaday people. In the latter category is a truly dreadful GOP scheme to decimate the middle class. Of course, they can't come right out and say that, so they speak in tongues about it. Here's the hoary senatorial scamp Mitch McConnell, babbling that Republicans will, quote, address the real drivers of debt by adjusting those programs to the demographics of America in the future. That means nothing to normal voters, but is music to the ears of the Koch brothers and all other corporate supremacists funding the GOP, for it signals that their party will go all out next year to undermine and effectively kill the people's Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid programs. Just a year ago, McConnell, Trump, and company rammed into law a $1 trillion tax giveaway for corporate elites, saying they didn't care that it would wildly inflate the deficit. Now, though, they say all of that red ink is suddenly of grave concern to them. So to stem the flow caused by their boondoggle for the rich, Republicans intend to cut off the Social Security and health care payments that middle-class and poor families rely on. This is Jim Hightower saying, this is not just diabolical, it's deliberately evil, and all politicians who support it should be condemned to the most hellish fate imaginable.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Roger Hickey is a veteran activist for economic justice. In this encore interview, he says that people are energized by a new vision of America's future, and progressive Democrats are ready to make it happen. And we say hello to Roger Hickey, co-founder and co-director of the Campaign for America's Future. Roger, thanks for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Good to be with you guys.
Nice to have you back with us again. And, you know, the last time we had you on, Roger, it was to talk about your 11-point economic plan called Pledge to Fight for America's Future. Remind us about the plan and give us an update on its progress.
Well, we have always been part, since Trump took over the White House, we have been always part of the resistance movement that has been pointing out the wrong directions that Trump and the Republicans have been taking in a wide variety of arenas. We've been opposing the bad stuff that they have been doing, some of it very, very bad. But we've also made the point that it's not enough to be in the resistance. It's not enough to say no. You also have to have an agenda for change for voters, and that's what we tried to do with this pledge to fight for good jobs, sustainable prosperity, and economic justice. And as part of that, we have an 11-point program that we can talk about to revive the American economy and create economic justice for all.
Let's look ahead to November. What do you see as some of the most encouraging news for progressives?
Well, I think the most important thing is that from the very beginning, people have been wise to Trump and realized that we didn't fight hard enough in the presidential year, and so people all over the country are energized and devoted to getting people out to vote, and that's the most important thing to do between now and the election. So there is a huge ferment of activity among both rank and file Democrats, independents, even some Republicans, and also among new people who are running for office around the country. And many of them are testing out some of these ideas as these candidates go in a new way to talk about the future of the country.
What are some of the ideas and concerns that are driving the early success of progressive candidates?
Well, one clear example is Trump's attacks on health care. This is a really crucial issue, and over the last 2 years, people have realized that Trump, in so many areas, has been just like the Republican establishment. He has successfully cut taxes and then come back, taxes for the wealthy, not for you and me. And then he's come back to the Congress and said, all right, now we have to cut Social Security, we've got to cut Medicare, we've got to cut Medicaid, and we've got to continue this war against what we've called Obamacare. So people realize that means it's going to be a worse and more chaotic and more private sector healthcare system, and that's motivating a whole lot of people. You see a whole lot of candidates talking about preserving Social Security, preserving Medicare, and the tax cuts, amazingly, have been very, very unpopular. People get it. Voters get it, that these tax cuts were for the wealthy, for the big corporations, and the corporations aren't even sharing that windfall with their workers. So we see healthcare and the tax issue becoming huge motivators for people to come out to vote. Obviously, women's issues, from the recent Supreme Court battle to things that have to do with women's economic equality, right to choose, etc. Those are motivating a huge new generation of women to run for office and to get out and work for candidates. And so if you run down our 11 points, jobs for all, invest in a green economy, empower workers, justice for all, anti-racism, a global economic strategy for working people, corporations and wealthy pay their fair share, close the Wall Street casino, and democracy, revive democracy and make it easier for people to vote and run for office. These are the kinds of issues that candidates are talking about, and a really revived grassroots democracy, grassroots activism is forcing the candidates to talk about.
We're speaking with Roger Hickey, co-founder and co-director of the Campaign for America's Future. Roger, if the Democrats do win back the House, your plan could be seen as a mandate. Do you believe Democrats will be effective in acting on it?
Yeah, listen, I don't want to jinx anything. We should all knock on wood. We should all make sure that we don't take this for granted and get out there and work between now and November. But if the Democrats do take back the House or even the House and Senate, there's going to be a whole lot of new members of the Progressive Caucus, newly elected people who are very progressive. There's going to be a lot of progressive Democrats heading up committee chairmanships in the House. And certainly we will be ready and able to put new ideas on the table in the form of legislation that will draw a distinction between the progressive Democrats and Republicans who, for example, just on the issue of drug prices. Trump once upon a time talked about skyrocketing drug prices. There's now several pieces of legislation in the works from the Democrats to lower drug prices, crucial element in healthcare. We will be able to do that kind of legislation and force that kind of debate, even if we don't have the votes to pass it in the Senate, which I hope we will. And so we will have the initiative again. We will have the ability to promote new ideas, as well as the investigative powers to look at what the Trump administration has been doing.
What sorts of things is your organization doing to make sure newly elected Democrats do, in fact, act on a progressive mandate?
Well, it's a complicated process. We've distributed our agenda widely to candidates, but we did not want to make these items, these particular 11 items, litmus tests where Democrats say, we won't support you if you don't support all 11. We encouraged candidates to talk about these issues where they were comfortable with it. And most of all, we encouraged grassroots groups who are working with candidacies all over the country to use this agenda both as a contrast to the failure of the Republican Party. Whatever happened to Trump's investment in infrastructure and creating jobs that way? It's gone. It's gone because they cut taxes instead. And also those grassroots groups who are working in the districts where these races are being held, they are the ones that are most able to talk to the candidates and say, look, here's the way you talk about jobs for all. Here's the way you talk about women's economic equality. Here's the way you talk about shared economic security. So it's been a variety of different ways, mostly bubbling up from the grassroots.
Now, in the wake of the Kavanaugh confirmation, America is an ever more divided nation, sadly. What does that mean for the ability of progressives to be effective?
Well, I think the grassroots of the Democratic Party, the ones who see themselves as activists, are very motivated. The young people, women, African Americans and Hispanics, those base voters, as you might call them, are very, very motivated, not only in reaction to all of the bad stuff that Trump has done, not only in response to this horrific process of forcing Kavanaugh through to the Supreme Court. So I think it's a matter of keeping up the momentum those groups. And in addition, I think that it's important to talk to Trump voters as well. There's a lot of Trump voters who they didn't like Hillary. They wanted to throw a stink bomb into the political system. And a lot of those people voted for Obama. They want to see candidates who fight for them and fight for the middle class. And they're starting to realize that Trump talked a good game, but he's failing on a whole lot of areas, like the infrastructure investment. It's non-existent. He's still working for the very wealthy and the corporations. That's his agenda, and so I think there's on all levels we have organized efforts to get people energized and inspired about not only stopping Trump, but taking over the political system once again, and moving real change. That's our job between now and November 6th.
And speaking of between now and November 6th, what can be done to continue to build that progressive surge on Election Day?
It's important that big, inspiring candidacies like Beto O'Rourke in Texas get a lot of visibility. Whether they win or lose, they are exciting the base. So candidates can lead. But I think most importantly is that you see it in the wake of Kavanaugh, a whole lot of organizations that have been focused on the Congress are now focused on winning a new Congress and also taking over the Democratic Party in the states in the process. So between now and November, we've just got to talk to our neighbors. We've got to organize systematically to make sure that people are registered to vote, to make sure that people are offered a way to get to the polls. Now is the time for the mechanics of winning an election, and it really helps if people are given a vision of what they might accomplish if the Congress changes hands. It's not just a political football. It's really our future that we're fighting for. So it's a combination of the mechanics of winning elections and inspiring people to be part of the process.
Amen to that. Roger Hickey, co-founder and co-director of the Campaign for America's Future, joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast. Roger, as always, we appreciate your time with us and do look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you, Jim, and everybody should get out and vote.
Absolutely. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Ashanti Golar takes Bill Press through the new landscape of women in public office.
We don't need your thoughts and prayers. We need your turnout. We need your voter turnout. Turnout is the key to making America America again and bringing things back to at least some semblance of normality by taking back the House and hopefully the Senate as well as a lot of governorships and state legislative races. It's the final stretch here now with 6 days, less than a week to go before the midterms. Lots and lots to talk about and lots of action to do between now and then. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us as we come to you live coast to coast from our studio on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where we join you online, of course, on YouTube, youtube.com/The Bill Press Show, looking at you on television on Free Speech TV and on the great WCPT, the big progressive voice of Chicago. We are there with you loud and strong every day, and it's nice to have you with us as well. We wanted to particularly look at the role of women on the Democratic side of the political ledger in these midterms, a very huge, significant factor through several organizations, one of which, Emerge America. Political director of Emerge America, Ashanti Golar, here joining us in studio. Ashanti, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So you're based here in Washington, right?
I am.
And the headquarters in San Francisco.
Yes.
Right. When did Emerge America get started?
So Emerge America actually started in...
If you get a little closer there. Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah.
We actually started in 2002 with Emerge California. Andrea Ducil is our president and founder, and she had this idea. She was living in San Francisco, a progressive city, but it still didn't have a lot of progressive women, Democratic women elected to office. And she knew that things could change, they could be better. And around her, she saw so many good women who should be running for office, but all they needed was training and resources. So she started Emerge California.
Emerge California.
And
now you have, I'm blanking on her name, but you have a very progressive African-American woman governor, a mayor of San Francisco.
We do. London Breed, an Emerge alum.
Thank you. Right. Is she an Emerge alum?
She's an Emerge alum. That is one of the important things that we do at Emerge. It's not only about getting more women in elected office, because there are 520,000 elected offices in this country.
How many?
520,000 elected offices in this country.
520,000?
Yes.
Whoa.
And several of those have never seen a woman elected.
I'm sure.
But also not a woman of color elected. Yeah. So that's what we're doing at Emerge. When we're talking about changing the face of politics, it's making sure that we have women from all walks of life, diverse backgrounds, ethnicity, race, socioeconomic, making sure that there really is true representation and a reflective democracy.
So you are looking, obviously, if there are 520,000, not just at U.S. Senate or United States Congress.
We look at everything. But the thing is, when you look at Senate, Congress, where did those people start? At the state level. They were city councilors, county commissioners. They were in the state house, the majority of them. So for us, it's really building the bench. But we also like to focus on the local level because that's where the decisions that impact people's everyday lives are truly made. Everything from your power to your streets to your kids' education. So making sure that we have great women in those positions as well who can elevate to state executive offices and then the federal level.
Right. So city council, important. School board, important, right? Mm-hmm. Board of supervisors, often neglected. In San Francisco, the board is the city council and the board of supervisors, city county.
Yes.
It's unusual. So it has a little more importance there, but in many places, counties are ignored, and yet they have tremendous power.
Much
regional boards, and then you step up, of course, to state legislature, assembly, Senate, statewide office, Congress, Senate, all the way up to President of the United States someday. Yeah, right.
Yep.
Why? And you support Democratic women?
We do.
Correct? Okay. I understand that, being a lifelong Democrat. You support progressive women? Progressive or moderate or conservative Democrats as well? Or
Democratic women, if they're a registered Democrat, they are welcome into our training program. We are in 25 states. A lot of those states are southern states. And we know that being a Democrat in San Francisco is very different than being a Democrat in Louisiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina. But what we have found is when we get all of these women into the training program, they form a sisterhood because it's really about getting the tools that they need to run for office. But when they run, they have a network of support of other like-minded women who want to see them succeed and win. So it doesn't become about, well, I'm more progressive than her, or she's more conservative about me. It's the fact that all of us want to see our communities do better. And here's a woman who wants to do that. So how do we help her along the way?
Why just women and no men?
So Women, we're 51% of the population, but we are not 51% of those 520,000 elected positions. It is still about 70% men. So I mentioned a reflected democracy. And if we want that, we have to have more women at the table. But women also govern differently than men. We love our men, but, we're more consensus driven. We're collaborative. We will reach across the aisle to get things done. In Congress, women sponsor more bills. They co-sponsor more bills. They bring home more money to their district. And one of the things that I really love to do is look at the legislation that Emerge alums introduce, and it really encompasses the entire community. It's equal pay, health care, paid family leave, veterans, homeless people, transportation, education. They really take into consideration everyone in the community and how they can impact them. It's really about serving, and they want to do their best job serving the community.
Do you believe that women govern better than men or do a better job than men?
We're pretty good at it, I think.
By the way, you won't get any disagreement from me on that, just for the record. I assert that all the time, that we men have screwed it up long enough, time we got out of the way. And
I think we're pretty good at it. And there was actually a study that came out a while ago that showed in cities where you have more women elected officials, the infant mortality rate is lower. So that also is a really great correlation to another impact of having more women in elected office, how all of those issues that I talked about actually have a positive impact on the community.
Now, while you say men are still 70% of those 520,000 seats, that's amazingly high to me. I'm surprised it's still that high, but that's lower than it used to be, right? I mean, there are more and more women holding political office today than ever before.
This is true, because the fact is, when women run for office, they do win at the same rates as men. We still don't have that many women running for elected office. And this is something that I talk about because post-2016, we have seen the surge, as a lot of people call it.
Right.
A lot of people are calling it a wave. I personally disagree with that. I don't see this as a wave. This is a movement. I think this is something we're absolutely going to continue to see with more women stepping up to run for office. But we still need more women running if we are going to close this gap and get parity. That's what I tell everyone. Merge is just going for parity here, just to have that equal representation. So we do need more women considering running for school board, city council, water board, sheriff, prosecutors, judges. I mean, we can have an entire conversation about the need to get more women in these law enforcement positions, because that's an area where we're really lacking. So we do need more women stepping up.
What impact or influence or whatever did the Women's March on Washington have?
Yes, the Women's March.
And I say Women's March on Washington because that's the one I participated in. But there were sister marches all over the country.
All over the country, all across the world.
Yes.
Women standing in solidarity with us. And for a lot of women, I think it was an awakening. And I just say a lot of women because for many women, they knew before that that they had to be politically involved. But there were so many women who felt, well, I'm registered to vote and I vote. I'm doing my civic duty. After that, they realized, wait, I did my duty and we got this outcome. What's happening? And they said, I need to do more. So that was running for office. That was volunteering more on campaigns. You've seen lots of organizations pop up post-2016, which are started by women, such as Sister District, Indivisible, The Arena. A lot of these organizations are women-led. And it's about making sure that we get everyone involved fully in the political system. What I say at Emerge is, yes, it's absolutely important for us to have great women running for office, but there's an entire ecosystem. These women need great campaign staff, and great campaign staff needs activists and volunteers. So let's make sure that we are fulfilling this fully so that we're able to get women elected in this country.
So if you are a woman who has been thinking about running, maybe, and not quite sure, need to know a little bit more about what it is, check out emergeamerica.org. Or if you're looking for some of the outstanding women candidates either in your local district or around the country that you should give your support to in these final 6 days. I'm sure if you go to emergeamerica.org, you'll see a lot of those profiles as well. So let's say somebody signs up, right? Mm-hmm. I'm thinking I might want to jump in, I might want to run. What do you offer them?
We offer them a 70-hour training program. When I say that, so many people go, wow, that's a long time. Yes, it is. But the fact is, running for office is hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And we want to make sure that the women are truly prepared. So
you have these training sessions in different parts of the country,
We are
I guess,
in 25 states, half the country.
And you bring women together.
We bring them together. The 70 hours, it's normally one weekend a month or 2 weekends a month for 6 to 7 months, up to 25 women in the program. They learn, what is a campaign plan? How do I write the campaign plan? How do I hire the staff to help run this campaign? I have to raise money. What are some tools and resources so that I can learn to do that? Mm-hmm. Communications. You mean I have to get up and speak to people and ask them for money? Yes, if you want to run for office and win, you absolutely do. So we do that entire communications part. How to get endorsements from all of these organizations. So many people don't understand how that process works. So we bring in groups from the community that support Democratic women, and they're able to talk about their endorsement process. So when it comes time, the women actually have a leg up because, oh, so-and-so was actually in my Emerge class, and I know how to actually navigate their process. So we go through everything from even how to do your field plan. What is canvassing? How do I knock a door? How do I set up a phone bank? We teach the women all of that. So when they leave the program, they're ready to run, and they're very competent about what it takes to run for office. And when they're out there running, they're more confident about it.
Right. So this is campaign 101, really.
Very in-depth.
Right. And is there a sub-level of that? I mean, because campaigns need a lot of volunteers. They need people who do that work. I mean, do you also direct? There may be some women and men who really want to get involved, but not necessarily run for office for whatever reason. Right. But they're willing to get out there and do whatever work the campaign needs, whether it's driving people to the polls or making phone calls or putting up campaign signs or whatever.
And that's one of the areas that we're expanding into as well. Several of our affiliates have done campaign staff training, and we actually piloted an activist training in Alabama because there's a record-breaking number of women who are running in Alabama, a lot of them Black women, which we love. But let's just think about Alabama in general. This is a state, let's be honest, has been neglected by the Democrats, the Democratic Party.
Right.
And for Emerge, when I came
until Doug Jones.
Until Doug Jones. But guess what? Doug Jones is running. Wait, what? How do we do all of this? What do you mean? How do I volunteer? There wasn't that infrastructure in place. And at Emerge, we knew the demographics in the South were changing. And we wanted to be on the ground and prepared to have these women ready to run when that time came. And that time came. So for us, it's making sure that they do have that additional infrastructure that they need with campaign staff and volunteers. So we're filling that need as well. And for us too, is making sure that we provide that additional support and ongoing network to our alums. We're not just saying, okay, great, you did our training program, go run for office.
Yeah, right.
They're still able to come back to us for advice from their state executive director, their state board. Several of our alums call me for political advice. And a lot of organizations don't give you that support. And that's one of the things I love about what we do.
So you've mentioned Emerge alums. Who and we talked about the mayor of San Francisco as certainly one of your most successful and most prominent. Who are some of the other Emerge alums that you're proud of?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, that could just be a show in itself talking about them. But if we want to stick with San Francisco, we love London Breed, and London was replaced on the Board of Supervisors by Malia Cohen, who is also an Emerge alum. And I love that story because we say we're building the New Girls Network at Emerge. So to see now 2 Emerge alums, but also 2 Black women leading San Francisco, for us, that is huge. We have women such as Sarah Gideon. She is the Speaker of the House in Maine. Maine is a state where we have several alums in the state house, and that's a way that we start to make transformations in government as well. Cycle after cycle, we see more Emerge alums getting elected to state houses. So we've seen that in Maine, in Oregon, Nevada, New Mexico. In Virginia, we saw that in 2017. We now have Delegate Danica Rome, who is the first open transgender state legislator in the country. She's one of our alums.
Is she? Yeah,
she is.
I've met her.
And
Right.
we're so proud of her. And she went into a class with Emerge, to run for office. And then she got to go to the State House with several women who are also in that class, bringing diversity too, with Elizabeth Guzman and Hayalala, who are the first Latinas in the House of Delegates in Virginia. So it's also about not only bringing women, but that diversity as well.
Yeah. Do you have any members, any Emerge alums in Congress yet?
We are going to have our first members of Congress this year, and we are so excited. One of them is going to be Deb Haaland from New Mexico 1.
Oh,
and she is set to be one of the first indigenous women in Congress with Sharice Davis. I'm calling it for both of them. Love those women. So we're super excited. And she's not an alum, but Ayanna Pressley was one of the founding board members of Emerge Massachusetts. So we love her as well, and we're excited to see what she's going to do.
Ayanna Pressley, who just won her primary against Michael Capuano, I guess. Yeah, right.
Massachusetts 7. Yes. Ayanna is a huge supporter of ours. Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, who is doing really great out there. She's one of our alums as well. So Sochi Torres Smalls in New Mexico, too. She's an alum. So I absolutely know we're going to get our Emerge Congressional Caucus this year, which I'm so excited about.
Yeah. So once they are out there as candidates, do you have a national fundraising network to help them, or how does that work?
So they work locally with their state executive directors. So fundraising is a huge part of what we teach in the program, and we give them all of those tools on where to go to find donors. They're always welcome to come back to Emerge events, and there are Emerge donors in those rooms, and they know that they are our alums. So you're also essentially introducing yourself to the Emerge donor base as well. So everything that the women need, they're able to go to as for advice. And we actually do have our candidate list on our website, and a lot of our alums tell us.
emergeamerica.org, right?
We have that on our website, and so many people will go through that and give to them. So even being associated with us in that way, being an alum, having their name on the website, with people seeing them run for office, brings in campaign donations.
You mentioned early on, too, I think it's not just the number of women running this year, and there are more women, as we mentioned, running for whatever level than ever before, but more women of color, too. And what do you attribute that to?
I think first I have to start with the fact that for women of color, if we're speaking specifically about Black women, it really wasn't until the 60s when women of color could really get involved in politics. So I think people don't mention that a lot, that we had a late start compared to non-women of color. And most people, when they see women of color, they think, oh, that's a voter. That's a great voter right there. That's a Democratic voter. They will vote for me. But for women of color, we know that we are not just voters. We do not have to go in to the polling place and vote for other people. We're seeing women of color step up and put their name on the ballot box because it is time. We're constantly out there campaigning for everyone else, talking about their issues, talking about what they would do for the community. But we also know that we can do those same things for our community. We can serve our community well. And you see women of color stepping up and doing it. With Black women, they've actually been running for office more of the past few cycles. It's just now with 2018 that we're just really seeing people pay more attention to the roles that Black women are taking with London, with Ayanna, with Stacey Abrams. This has been a really long time coming with Black women, women of color, really starting to own their political power and not just being voters.
And in the Latino community as well.
Latinas as well, our indigenous sisters, our Asian sisters, all of us. I'm really excited to see who's going to be elected to office in November from women of color communities.
Now, I'm thinking, as a former Democratic chair of California, among the people that I worked with and still very good friends with, who were pioneers, really, Barbara Lee.
Love her. I just fangirl whenever I'm in her presence. It's really embarrassing.
Well, I understand. I kind of do too, right? she's incredible. Right?
She is. She's so great.
And has been a strong leader, for years and years and years. And certainly time has proven that she was right in her vote against the war in Iraq.
And she stood by it, and I love that conviction. And she's a role model for all women of color too, because she did show that you can take that dissenting vote, and while you may be criticized during that moment, you have to know your truth, and you have to know what's best for your district. And now,
and I don't know her, but one of my certain role models is Stacey Abrams.
I know Stacey. I love her. I'm actually going out on Friday to do GOTV this weekend for her. So very excited.
It's a sign of the times, really, and it's sort of a sad reflection on America that we've never had an African-American woman governor.
I know.
Right? Stacey will be the first.
She is. We're claiming it for her.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about Stacey, another woman who I fangirl over. I've been involved with her campaign since the beginning. And on Twitter the other day, someone actually posted a picture of two young Black girls who were watching her speak. And they had this sign saying, "Stacey, we love you. Georgia needs you." And to see their faces looking at her. That's why representation matters so much, not only for young girls, but also for those other women of color across the spectrum who are being told, it's not your time. They won't vote for someone who looks like you. Do you really think you can raise the money? This cycle, absolutely. Stacey is showing that you can be your authentic, natural self, have a good message, work those doors, make those phone calls, and you can prevail.
And really make a difference.
Really make a difference.
No, it is so exciting. And I do have to mention another longtime friend, and I think very effective legislator. I knew her in the state assembly and now in Congress is Congresswoman Maxine Waters, of course, favorite target of Donald Trump. But one thing, because Maxine's so good. I
love Auntie Maxine, too.
Auntie Maxine, or Maxine, my queen, as sometimes we call her on this show. But no, she's been guest on the show here, and I've interviewed her many times and worked with her in California politics. Right?
Yeah. What I love about her, and a lot of people don't give her credit, is she's really energized young people, too. Young people of color. That's where the Auntie Maxine comes from, because they're able to look up to her and they see a member of Congress speaking truth unapologetically, and they love it because that's what they want to see. That's what gives them faith in their government and their elected officials. And I definitely don't think she gets enough credit for that.
No, she's a rock star among millennials. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, she really is. And willing to take on, unapologetically, to take on Donald Trump.
Yeah, she's just come at me.
I know. God, it's such great work that you're doing. I'm so glad that you're out there again. It's Emerge America, emergeamerica.org, making a real difference in America, a real positive difference for change in America's political landscape. You ought to check it out and give them all the help you can. And the candidates who are the alums of emergeamerica.org, emergeamerica.org. Ashanti Golar, great to meet you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
That's all for the America's Democrats podcast. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Miles Rapoport, Roger Hickey, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. For the America's Democrats podcast, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.